break, a young man, one of the participants of my program, came up to me and said, Phil, very serious, very somber-minded. He said, Phil, I wanted you to know I'm enjoying your presentation very much. And I go, well, great, thanks. I'm glad you're telling me that. He said, but I'm wondering, is it possible that maybe you've forgotten a key commandment for leaders? Well, of course that's possible. But what do you have in mind? And he looked me in the eye and he said these words. He said, I think a key commandment of leaders is that a leader ought to know your name. And this is the story he told me. He said, when I was growing up in this city, he said, when people would come to me, even from the time I was a little bitty boy, and ask me, what do you want to do when you grow up? He said, I would tell them, I want to be a cop. He said, that never changed. I never wavered in that. As I got into high school, people said, where are you going to go to college? I'm not going to college. I'm going to the law enforcement academy. I'm going to be a cop. He said, literally weeks after I graduated from high school, I am, in fact, enrolled in the Florida Law Enforcement Academy, which I graduated from, and just weeks after that, I was hired as a law enforcement professional to work in the city that I grew up in. I am protecting and serving family, friends, neighbors, and he said, I'm living out my dream. He said, they put me in a patrol car, and they put me in uniform, and I became a patrol officer. And he said, literally, I could not have been happier. And I did that for 2 years. He said, I must have done a pretty good job, because during that 2-year period, they gave me commendations and acknowledgments of different sorts for things that I'd done. And he said, frankly, I was living the dream. But then he said, about into my 3rd year with the force, he said, I got to thinking, I'm going to do this for 30 years. This isn't just a short-term gig for me. This is my career. And therefore, if I'm going to do this for 30 years, I need to learn other parts of law enforcement. And he said, so therefore, I went in and I volunteered to take on the role and responsibility of learning to be a detective in investigations. He said, I got moved from patrol into investigations. They took me out of my uniform, put me in street clothes. They took me out of a patrol car, put me in an office. He said, I'd worked there for just over a year when the occasion that I'm about to explain to you happened. One day, he said, I was coming out of the restroom. I was in the law enforcement headquarters, the office building. He said, I'd been in the restroom. I was late for an appointment. He said, admittedly, I was rushing out of the bathroom when I ran literally, physically into the police chief. Boom, hit him. He said, man, that's embarrassing. He said, I stepped back and I said, sorry, sir, I was in too big of a hurry. He goes, it's not a problem. But he said, he looked at me and he asked 3 questions. 3 questions. He said, who are you? Officer John Doe, sir. What do you do? I'm an investigator with the department, sir. How long have you been here? Just over 3 years, sir. Let me ask you a question before I go any further. Is this bad? Shake your head this way if you think it is. Second question, do you think it can get worse? Because it's about to. As bad as those 3 questions are, who are you? What do you do? How long have you been doing it? As bad as those 3 questions sound, even me repeating these this many years later, listen to what the young man told me the police chief said when he answered all 3 of them. Yes, I'm an investigator, sir. I've been here for 3 years in the department. He said, and I quote, I'm a busy man. I don't have time for details. In one conversation that lasted less than a minute, a young man who had dedicated his entire life and 3 years on the job, in less than 1 minute, that leader relegated that young man to being a detail. Now, let me ask you a quick question. As dedicated as that young man might have been, do you think he can rally the same emotion and enthusiasm for doing the job that he would have done before? I don't think so. If that police chief came to him and asked him a special favor, can you do this? Can you work longer? Can you take on a new assignment? I don't think he would have been as readily available or willing to do that which he was being asked to do than if there would have been a level of authentic engagement. A level of engagement that said, I know who you are, I know what you do, I know how important this is to you, and I know how important you are to us. For that police chief, he saw that as detail. I see that as an absolute requirement.